Director of the Roundtable, Executive Director of the Connecticut Roundtable on Climate and Jobs. And I just wanted to thank you all for coming to this webinar. It's interesting that we're in a period of time where the Abrahamic religions are all celebrating, and we just want to reach out to all of you and wish you a happy Passover, happy Ramadan, and Easter. And we're really excited about presenting this webinar to talk about climate, talk about interfaith, and just have a conversation around all of this. So I will be quiet, but I would love to introduce you to Elijah Harris, who's the Director of Equity and Inclusion at the Jewish Youth Climate Movement. So Elijah.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Elijah Harris, and I'm a high school senior at Watkinson School in Hartford, Connecticut. I'm also a competitive gymnast, aspiring doctor, and youth climate activist. My journey to fighting climate justice started in November of 2019. My school does the annual service trip to the Dominican Republic, where we conduct work in the Bates, also known as the sugarcane fields. Most people that live in the Bates make under $4 a day and are isolated from access to healthcare. Our team splits up into construction work on a house for a family and into our mobile medical clinics, which saw around 100 patients per day. At the end of the week, we finished construction on a house and treated over 700 patients in the medical clinics. While our work was focused on construction and healthcare, I noticed something else. This country was facing the effects of climate change. Increasing temperature, severe storms, and more common droughts, all results of the climate crisis. In 2017, the Dominican Republic was ranked 11th most vulnerable country to climate change, and it is only getting worse. Many Caribbean countries like the Dominican Republic are exposed to much more severe tropical storms like hurricanes, and the fact of the matter is, most of these countries have much lower greenhouse gas emissions than countries like the United States. These people are facing the effects of climate change when they have little to no effect on the environment. I was really able to put things into perspective as to how vast and pressing this crisis really is. When I came back to the United States, I wanted to try my best to get involved. I started by going on a trip with my synagogue's confirmation class to Washington, D.C. While there, we worked with the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism and hundreds of other Reform Jewish teens from across the country on lobbying to our senators and representatives in Congress. We spent the weekend learning about issues like immigration reform, reproductive rights, and climate change. I decided I wanted to focus on climate change, and from there, our group started drafting speeches. After we finished, the day was finally here. We had meetings with the staff of Senator Blumenthal, Senator Murphy, and Representative Larson. It felt gratifying being heard by people that actually have an impact on United States legislation. From there, I continued my work with the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism. I was participating in a fellowship, getting young adults registered to vote. And someone in the group mentioned a Jewish youth climate movement taking applications. The name immediately caught my attention. A group where I could connect with and work with other Jewish teens that have the same passion that I have. I ended up submitting an application, and the next thing you know, I was at the welcome meeting with all of the other new members. I finally found a place that I could really engage in the work that I wanted to do. The Jewish Youth Climate Movement, also known as JYCM, has 5 different working groups: the Public Relations, Communications, Actions, Equity and Inclusion, and Policy teams. I am currently the Director of Equity and Inclusion and a member of the Policy Working Group. Our goal is to make climate justice a defining feature of Jewish identity and to empower the next generation of Jewish youth to build a more sustainable and equitable world. We do so by organizing climate strikes, lobbying for climate legislation, and climate advocacy. We lead educational programs and organize advocacy projects surrounding public policies aiming to enact systemic change for climate justice. Our National Leadership Board is composed of 30 teenagers, and we have around 40 local chapters across the country, which are part of schools, synagogues, community centers, and they are regionally based. We recently had our virtual climate summit, where young people and adults joined us for a series of trainings and presentations on topics including historical political climate movements, the intersectionality of climate justice work, organizing and advocacy skills, and preparing young people to be leaders. We are also pushing for change outside of our community. In October, we, in a coalition with other climate and Jewish groups, helped organize a sit-in and protest outside of BlackRock headquarters. For those who don't know, BlackRock is the world's largest asset manager, managing over $10 trillion. They are one of the greatest investors in the fossil fuel industry. So we blocked their doors, shouted into our bullhorns, stopped business as usual, and demanded that they divest. These are just a few examples of the actions we have taken as a movement. Values like Tikkun Olam, which mean to repair the world, and Tzedek Tzedek Tirdof, meaning justice, justice shall you pursue, encouraged me to continue the fight against climate change as a young Jew. I also feel drawn to the fact that my generation will be the one that experiences the worst effects of climate change, unless we do something about it. At the same time, I urge our adults in government and in power to do something about this problem, because you are the ones that can currently carry out real change. I would like to end with an excerpt of a prayer for peace from Rabbi Nachman. May it be your will, Holy One, our God, our ancestors' God, that you erase war and bloodshed from the world, and in its place draw down a great and glorious peace, so that nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. Rather, may all the inhabitants of the earth recognize and deeply know this great truth, that we have not come into this world for strife and division, nor for hatred and rage, nor provocation and bloodshed. We have come here only to encounter you, eternally blessed one. Thank you very much. I would now like to pass it to Terry Eickel, Director of the Interreligious Eco-Justice Network. Thank you again.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Elijah, for those powerful words and that wonderful testimony. I'd like to also thank the Connecticut Roundtable on Climate and Jobs for putting this together. They're a wonderful organization to work with, and I'm grateful to be a part of this. And I'd also really like to thank Alana Butler and Lynn Campbell for their leadership roles in helping put this webinar together. Obviously, as a faith-based environmental group, the Interreligious Eco-Justice Network believes that people of faith have a powerful voice to raise in the issue of climate and environmental justice and issues, and so we're grateful to be a part of this tonight. And in addition to our young climate activist Elijah, we have 4 other panelists that we'll hear from tonight. And I tried very hard to put together bio slides for these folks, and I will say it was very difficult because all of our panelists are so accomplished. It was very difficult to trim their bios enough to get it on one slide. However, Michelle, if you could share the first slide. Our first panelist is Rabbi Joshua Hammerman, and he is a celebrated rabbi, an award-winning author and blogger, and he's been with the Temple Bethel in Stamford, Connecticut for over 3 decades. As Temple Bethel's spiritual leader, he has focused his efforts on creating an oasis of warmth, love, and mutual respect befitting the role of a modern congregation in an increasingly complex world. He is the author of Embracing Auschwitz and Mencius Mark's Life Lessons of a Human Rabbi, Wisdom for Untethered Times. He is the winner of the Rock Hour Award, the highest honor in Jewish journalism, and 2019 Religion News Association Award for Excellence in Commentary. Musings of a rabbi, journalist, father, husband, poodle owner, Red Sox fan, and self-proclaimed mensch, taken from essays, columns, sermons, and thin air. He regularly writes for the New York Jewish Week and the Times of Israel, and also the Temple Bethel had installed one of the largest, if not still the largest, solar array on any faith building in the country. And I believe they did that in 2013. So I don't know if their record has been overtaken, but it's enormous. And he has been a leader on climate and environmental justice for a very long time. So I'd like to welcome Rabbi Josh Hammerman. And the question that I have for all of our panelists is I asked them initially to discuss climate justice from their own faith perspective and what it means for them.
Thank you so much, Terry. And Elijah, thank you. I mean, if I'm trying to come at this from a Jewish perspective, you've already done it so beautifully. And I really, really appreciate the words that you had to share. So I'm going to try to sort of expand upon what you said. Of course, also, happy festive season. This is such a remarkable convergence of sacred times. It's sort of a spiritual trifecta of Ramadan, Holy Week, and Passover, and very rare. So we can't take that lightly either. The Jewish environmental activist Nigel Savage said you could argue that the Jewish people have been thinking about sustainable energy ever since God spoke to Moses out of a bush that burned but was never consumed. Moses was perhaps the first environmentalist. He recycled his staff into a snake, got Egypt to turn off all its lights for 3 days, and convinced an entire nation to go on a 40-year nature hike. And the Maccabees, if we want to deal with another holiday, they took a small cruse of oil and stretched it out for 8 miraculous nights. So climate justice is absolutely a core Jewish value, and we feel it this week of all weeks, of all other weeks, Passover. It's a festival of liberation for people, but it's also a festival of liberation for the land, for the planet. It's called, in fact, one of its official names is Chag HaAviv, the spring festival. The world comes back to life, and we dip a green vegetable to symbolize spring at the Seder on the first nights of Passover. And we also dip it into salt water to commingle the tears of slaves with the dry tears of the parched soil. The festival calls on us to treat our fellow human beings as part of our family, not as others, not as strangers. And in a way, what it's really also doing is calling upon us to treat the land in the same way, not as an other. The earth, the planet are not other to us. They are part of who we are. And to emphasize that point, this year is actually a special year on the Jewish calendar. It is a sabbatical year. Every 7th year, the land is allowed to lie fallow in the land of Israel to rest, just as human beings do on the Sabbath, on the Shabbat. That way we can all live at one, because we know what happens when we don't. Now, we have to change our language, I believe, a little bit. We call something biblical. Usually it means something really bad is happening. You know, these floods are biblical. 500-year floods, famine, biblical. Wildfires, biblical. We never say this rainbow was biblical, or this meal was biblical, or this sunset was biblical, or that sex was truly biblical. When we call something biblical, it usually involves something involving Sodom and Gomorrah or Noah's Ark. And I think we need to get beyond that. Floods, tornadoes, famines, they're considered biblical, and also acts of God. We have to get beyond that. We have to try to strike a deal with the insurance companies to not call them acts of God, because we're only seeing one side of the coin here, the destructive side, and we pin the blame on God for all of it. We all know now that these increasingly destructive acts of God are not all God's fault. Now, I want to point out that the Bible itself walks back that notion. And really, that is, I believe, a core Jewish value, that it's not all left up to God. The earth is given to human beings, according to the psalmist, not to God. The heavens belong to God. Psalm 18, we read, "Then the channels of waters were seen, and the foundations of the world were discovered at your rebuke, O Lord, at the blast of breath from your nostrils." Pretty cruel. But then we read in the next line, verse 17, "Yishlach mimarom yikacheni yamsheni bimayim rabim." God sent from above, took me, and drew me out of many waters. Notice how the second verse completely reverses the sentiment of the prior verse. God is the source of the raging waters, but also then becomes the force within each of us that drives us to help, to reach out, to save those who are struggling in those same waters. And the word for draw out actually in Hebrew contains the root letters for the name Moshe, Moses, the one who was drawn out of the Nile by a total stranger, ostensibly an enemy, Pharaoh's daughter. Jewish history then began with an act of kindness by a stranger, the saving of a child from raging waters. So I would contend that to live biblically is not to bear witness to divine rebuke, but to be an instrument of divine salvation, to help draw the suffering victim from out of the raging waters. To live biblically, then, is to be part of the solution, to lend a hand, not simply to be awestruck at the unbridled force of nature, even when the impact is unprecedented. To live biblically, then, is to save the suffering in our parched and flooded planet, because we have all become one community. There's now really only one circle to draw, that beautiful blue orb called Earth. Floods and famines, yeah, they're biblical, but I'm absolutely biblically awestruck at the infinite capacity of the human heart. The heavens are the heavens of God, but the earth has been given to us, to humanity. And so the things that we are now contesting, these weather events that grow increasingly severe, they're not acts of God at all. Instead, we've been given the keys. We are the instruments of destruction, but also of God's and the earth's salvation. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much. That was amazing. That was just terrific. What a great start. Whew. All right. Next, I would like to introduce Sister Elaine Betoncourt, who is a nun that I have known for many, many years. She is a member of the Sisters of St. Joseph's of West Hartford in Connecticut. Social justice advocacy and care for creation have been her passion for a very long time. Sister Elaine, sorry, hang on a second. Sister Elaine has worked as a teacher, a missionary in Appalachia, a parish pastoral associate, and as a member of the Holy Family Retreat team in West Hartford. Her current focus is promoting climate and social justice within her religious community with the OCSJM and with Just Faith Ministry at Holy Family Retreat Center. She's a native of Middletown, Connecticut, and she worked with IREJN in sponsoring 2 Earth Day events at Riverfront several years ago. That was the Riverfront Earth Day. It was wonderful. And she has had a chance to view firsthand the ravages of destructive practices of logging and coal mining in Kentucky and damage to the earth and displacement of poor people in Haiti, Bolivia, and Brazil due to deforestation. So I would like to welcome Sister Elaine Betoncourt.
Thank you, Terry. I'm happy to be with everybody and to share a few words about the Catholic faith. The Judeo-Christian sacred scriptures that animate the Catholic faith tell us that the earth and all its creatures were created by God and belong to God. And we humans were given the task of being stewards of all that God created. At the present time, we acknowledge that we have not been good stewards and that our human endeavors have greatly harmed the earth's systems. Systems that have worked harmoniously for eons, but are now in irreversible jeopardy unless we humans quickly change our ways and protect these systems. Many things have to change course, but it is we human beings who need to change, says Pope Francis in his important 2015 encyclical Laudato Si on care of our common home, addressed not only to Catholics, but to the entire world. During the past half century, we have been warned repeatedly of the growing degradation of soil, air, water, and forests. And to our peril, we have ignored the warnings and continued our destructive ways. We are hearing so many stories about people suffering from flooding, droughts, storms, and changing weather patterns, exacerbated by the extraction of resources by corporations who seem to care little for the welfare of the earth or the people affected, and mainly about the money that can be gained from these industries. We are all complicit in this activity, as we all benefit from it. We struggle to know what to do or how to change our ways. We rely on government and business to address the problems, feeling that we can do little to turn the tide. But as Pope Francis states so urgently, it is we ourselves who need to change. Everything is connected, and what we do matters. Pope Francis urges each one of us to do something to bring about the healing of the earth. Some of my current efforts involve planting trees with the Arbor Day Foundation and inviting others to do so. Eating less meat and encouraging others to do likewise. Purchasing only things that are absolutely needed. Sharing information about Project Drawdown and the 80+ ways they have identified to sequester carbon back into the earth. And also urging participation in organizations such as Food and Water Watch and the Sierra Club. In recent decades, caring for the earth has been and is the message of many Catholic voices, like Passionist priest Father Thomas Berry and Dominican Sister Miriam Therese McGillis. Globally, from the Vatican and Pope Francis, we have the online Laudato Si platform, where Catholic groups, inspired by the Pope's encyclical, are urged to record their efforts to address global warming for the healing of our planet. Personally, I have made protecting the earth my chief priority. It's what I think about when I arise each morning. Many are responding to this call to protect and heal the earth, and this is good news, but so much more is needed. And that is why we are gathered together on this Zoom meeting tonight to inspire one another to more prayer and action so as to leave a livable planet for future generations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sister Elaine. Those are powerful words. And I know I speak for everyone when I say it's so great to have that leadership from the Pope on this issue. And the Laudato Si is such a powerful document. So that was so wonderful when he released it. And it's so great to see it being used by so many communities. Our next speaker is, hang on a second, it is Pastor Kelcy Steele from Varick Memorial AME Zion Church. Wonderful. Thank you so much. And I have to say, this is one of those bios that was just impossible to choose. It's very accomplished, but I've highlighted a few things. In September 2016, Pastor Steele was appointed by Bishop Dennis V. Proctor to the Varick Memorial AME Zion Church in New Haven as their 43rd pastor. Varick is the second oldest church in the AME Zion denomination and is the mother church of the New England Annual Conference. Pastor Steele is presently serving the New Haven community in the following capacities: CEO of the Varick Center for Empowerment, the chair of the board of directors for Booker T. Washington Academy, an affiliate member of New Haven Rising, the director of evangelism for the New England Conference, dean of district studies, board member, cultural ambassador for Yale Center for Clinical Investigation, a board member for Bridges of Hope, and a board member for Connecticut Board of Pardons and Paroles. He is an inductee of the 2015 World Methodist Council Order of the Flame and a sought-after evangelist, revivalist, and workshop facilitator. Pastor Steele is the author of the book, The Sound of Revival, Exploring Prophetic Preaching in the Wesleyan Tradition, and hosted a weekly radio show sponsored by Roscoe's Chicken and Waffles at the RMC Media Center called Inspirational Moments with Pastor Steele. Welcome, Pastor Steele.
Thank you. Thank you. Grace and peace to everyone. It's such a delight to be invited to speak with you guys on today. And I guess I will be speaking on behalf of the Christian faith, but in particularly the AME Zion Church. And in our denomination, we highlight the disproportionate impact of climate change and pollution on certain communities, including Black and low-income communities in the United States and communities in developing countries around the world. This disproportionate exposure of people and community of colors to pollution and toxic material, which can lead to many adverse health impacts, is referred to as environmental racism. Our tradition reminds us of the importance of appreciating and caring for the work of creation. When God created the first human being, God led them around the Garden of Eden and said, look at my work, see how beautiful they are, how excellent. Take care not to spoil or destroy my world, for if you do, there will be no one to repair it after you. That came from a commentary on Ecclesiastes chapter 7, verse 13. And I find that it's imperative for us to work to protect our world, not just for future generations, but for all the people who are alive today. Therefore, the earth can declare to no part of humanity that it does not belong here, that this soil is not their rightful home. Therefore, all of humanity deserve equal access to soil, water, air, and all natural resources free from pollution. And this is currently not the case in the United States and even around the world. Let us look at the water crisis in Flint, Michigan. It shedded a new light on situations of environmental racism that are happening across the country. Climate change and pollution disproportionately affect people who are least responsible for it. For example, community of color emit 20% less carbon than white communities, yet face some of the greatest impacts. Furthermore, people who live closer to U.S. chemical factories are 75% more likely to be Black and 60% more likely to be Latino, making them at greater risk of health concerns due to toxins released into the air, soil, and water. Death due to asthma, which is exacerbated by pollutants, is twice as common for Black people than it is for white people. The above statistics highlight just a few of the many environmental injustices that community of colors face in the United States. But we are committed to support global efforts, such as the climate agreement, and taking local steps through increased energy efficiency to curb the impact of climate change on the most vulnerable communities. In order to live in a truly just world, we must join in efforts to fight environmental injustice in the United States and even across the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pastor Steele. It's so great to have you here, and thank you so much for raising that incredibly important topic. IREJN actually is doing 2 webinars in the next 2 Mondays on eco-justice actions to help reduce pollution in those communities and improve lives and environmental justice. So I'll talk a little bit about that later. But thank you so much for your words. And so our final speaker this evening, before we jump to our Q&A, is Senator Saud Anwar, and we're very grateful to have him as well. He's a state senator, and he was first elected to the Connecticut Senate in February 2019 to represent the residents of the 3rd State Senate District towns of East Hartford, East Windsor, Ellington, and South Windsor. He was first elected to public office in 2011 as a member of South Windsor's Town Council. He has served 2 terms as South Windsor mayor, once from 2013 to 2015 and once from 2017 to 2019. Saud is a medical doctor with specializations in treating lung diseases and critical care medicine, occupational and environmental medicine. He currently serves as the chair of the Department of Internal Medicine at Manchester Memorial and Rockville General Hospitals. Saud was trained in pulmonary and critical care medicine at and holds a master's degree in public health from Yale University. Saud also works with humanitarian and peace initiatives on a local, national, and global scale. He has organized medical missions for disaster relief, receiving citations for doing so from former Governor Jody Rell, United States Senator Richard Blumenthal, and Lieutenant Governor Susan Weissowitz. Welcome, Senator Anwar. And Ramadan Mubarak. Senator Anwar is coming to us. He's celebrating Ramadan, and so we're grateful to have you.
Thank you so much, Terry. Thank you. And it's an honor to be here, and it's almost humbling to follow some of the speakers, actually, each and every one of the speakers. I'll speak about environment from Islamic perspective. And I wanted to frame this from the way of Prophet, but also from the verses from the Quran. At one point, Prophet was walking, and then he saw one of his friend, name was Saud, and then he was actually doing ablution, which is called wudu. When you're actually about to pray, you clean yourself up. And then he said, Saud, why are you wasting water? And he was doing that at a stream. And he said, look, this is a water that's going on a stream. And if I am just using this water, what's wrong with it? And he said, even if you're at a river, just use the minimum that you need, so that you make sure that you're not using more than your need. So you leave it for others to be able to get blessings from the water or anything that you touch. And so there's a verse of the Quran, which I'm going to give you the reference because it's getting recorded and people want to go and listen and read this, is chapter 6, verse 165, which frames the role of humanity. What is our role? It refers to us as the stewards of the earth, as the ones who actually have a responsibility to keep the earth safe and well and healthy. And that's the responsibility of every human. So people say, what am I here for? One of our responsibilities is to be stewards of the planet. There's another verse from chapter 25, verse 63, which says, walk on this earth gently. And which of course means humility, but at the same time also means that use all that you can and make sure you're protective of the environment where you are touching and the part of that environment. And there's chapter 7, verse 31 says, O children of Adam, do not eat and drink in excess. He does not like those who commit excess in anything. There's a chapter 6, verse 38, and I just love this. It puts things in perspective, that there is no creature on the earth, within the earth, or the birds that fly with its wings, except that they are part of communities just like you. And the word that is used is ummah. Ummah, you'll hear the word within the Muslim community, which means family. So you say we are family, but in the Quran, it's referred to as all creatures are ummah, they're family. And then you have to protect the family, just like the birds, the insects, the animals, they are part of your extended family, and it's your responsibility to take care of that family as you would of your own family, which is important. And there's a verse that fascinates me, is in chapter 21, verse 32, which says that we have made a sky a protected ceiling, but they from its sign and turning away. It talks about the ozone layer over the environment, and it says there's a protection that's there. What we as humanity are doing is we are actually depleting that protection. what keeps the planet safe, what keeps the Earth in a perfection or hopefully closer to perfection state is the ozone layer. And it's talked about that there is a protection and a canopy on top of the planet, and it should be protected. So when you look at our responsibility, what do we do? It starts from the individual themselves. And how do we live the faith? Are we trying to use the minimum that we can get away with? It's very difficult, but that's the struggle, because it starts from us. And then what happens is, can we do that in the community? And then can we do that more beyond the policy? And the biggest strength one can achieve is, as I think Sister Betoncourt has talked about, is how she is trying to apply living in a simple fashion in her own life. And in a part of the world where we have thankfully a lot of blessings, and then making a choice to try and reduce your carbon footprint, and then doing it knowingly, is part of the struggle that we all have. And if we can do it within ourselves, then hopefully we can go to the next level and then make policies where it come from a deeper position, deeper understanding of what our responsibilities are. So this is a journey which starts from us and then moves on, but faith is guiding us. And the beauty is, each and every faith is about sustainability. There's a beautiful Jewish story that I wanted to share, where it was said that when Moses came down from the mountain, he actually did have more than one tablet at that time. And at that time he was upset, and then he had broken one of the tablet. And if somebody was to look at what was on that, one of the things was that God would have said is that preserve and protect the earth I have given you. That is what a lot of people say. That would have been one of the commandments. And then because of the fact that it was broken, we don't know the commandments, but they were probably one of them was this. So I'll stop over here, and it's just a blessing to be with everyone and having this important conversation. Thank you.
Well, that is wonderful. Thank you so much. This has been so fabulous. And I want to invite all of our panelists back, and also Elijah Harris, who will be joining us for this moderated Q&A. And Michelle, if you wouldn't mind sharing the screen for Elijah's bio, although he basically told you, I think, everything that's in it. He is a very impressive senior at Watkinson School. He is a very accomplished gymnast. He's attending Brown this fall and has been very involved in the Jewish youth climate movement, correct? Did I get that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Yeah, great. And so he is the head of his school's student Jewish organization called Chai, and is the co-head of the Model United Nations team. He's also the treasurer of his school's student foundation. And we heard about his service trip to the Dominican Republic in November 2019, where he was able to see the real life effects of climate change, which put things into perspective on how vast this issue is. And at that point, he began to get very involved in climate change and climate justice in 10th grade when he went with his confirmation class to DC. And there he lobbied his representatives and senators on climate change, learned more about the issue, and he then joined the Jewish Climate Youth Movement as the DEI Director, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Director, which is a national organization. So it's really great to have all five of you back. And so my first question was, and this can obviously be just a general conversation, but for you, what's another issue that you care about that you feel intersects with climate change, and how do those issues relate to each other? So, and it could be something that your congregation, your religious community is already working on, and climate change touches it, and not maybe everyone would realize that.
I can start. And
sure,
I
go
think
ahead.
This is what Pastor K had touched on, is that there's a broader climate change that's happening in the planet, but there is a climate issues that are within our state, within parts of our state. If you look at the health issues that communities and the minority communities, the communities of color that they're facing, they are not able to have a normal, equal, healthy life than others in the community, because some of the worst parts of our lack of taking care of the environment goes into some parts of the cities where the minority communities live. And this has been happening for so long that it has actually resulted in the health outcomes being completely different amongst multiple other things. But the environmental challenges within our communities is negatively impacting many.
And if I can also piggyback on that, I would say food deserts, especially in low-income communities where we're not able to have access to fresh food, and we're forced to eat food that's have pesticide and all of those chemicals that are really not healthy for the body. And so I think it all go hand in hand. And we just recently at Varick opened or co-sponsored a community fridge. It's a 24-hour fridge where people are able to actually go and take whatever food they want, leave whatever food they want, but we stock it with organic, fresh produce and fresh food so that they can have access to it, because everyone can't get down to Elb's Mark or edge of the woods, and so we try to bring that into that community, Dixwell.
That's fantastic.
I want to pick up on the food question. I think I mentioned in my remarks Project Drawdown that identified 84 ways or over 80 ways that we could put carbon back into the earth. And in their list of 80, number 3 and number 4 on their list of things that cause the harmful emissions, the carbon emissions, 3 and 4 have to do with food. One is the meat production, which is huge in terms of its destructive force in creating emissions. Just raising the animals and growing food for the animals and processing and all of that it uses immense quantities of water. So that's number 3. And number 4 is wasting food. At least 1/3 of all the food that is grown and produced is wasted. And so I appreciate what you said, Pastor Steele, and that's a very real problem in our communities. But there's a bigger problem about our lack of understanding of how unintentionally we are harming ourselves, So that I see that as really an important aspect.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So if I might sort of shift gears a little bit, you see my virtual backdrop here. It's the recreation of an old synagogue in Ukraine that has been created for the Jewish Museum in Warsaw, as well as part of it at Babi Yar, the site of the Great Massacre in Kyiv that was, in the early 1940s during the Holocaust. There is, I think, a real linkage between the callous regard and disregard for human life and the callous disregard for our planet. And I've done a lot of studying work on the Holocaust, so I see that there, but we don't have to go that far back. Just a few weeks ago, right before we had our initial meeting where we were talking about this, and I was trying to contemplate what do I want to talk about? Where do I want to focus on what the world will be like in 10 years? And that very night, we heard of a bombing at a nuclear facility in Ukraine. And I'm thinking, are we even going to be around in 10 minutes, much less 10 years? There's this callous disregard for human life that we've seen just in the last week, especially in Ukraine by the Russian invaders. It absolutely links to a callous disregard to our environment, destroying wantonly without any regard for the long-term implications or the short-term of actions. And we see that again and again. Hatred has no bounds, including hatred of our planet.
Absolutely.
If I could just jump into, my point kind of relates back to Pastor Steele's point. But I think that climate justice and racial justice interact in many ways. For centuries, colonists have exploited foreign lands and indigenous peoples for their labors and resources, often causing irreparable harm. And with today's demands on the planet's natural resources on the rise, infliction of vulnerable populations continues with an upsurge in environmental degradation, destruction of habitat, pollution, human rights. And unfortunately, Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities around the world are frequently the first to be affected. So I think that racial justice and climate change intersect greatly, and that's an important place to start.
Absolutely. I mean, I 100% agree with everything everyone has said. I mean, asthma is the leading cause of medical cause of school absence in urban communities. Kids miss an average of 60 days per school year for asthma, which is a third of the school year, and it gives pause to how children can succeed if they're forced to miss that much school due to air pollution. The climate change, both from extreme weather and also our extreme disregard for people and the results of conflict and war, like in Ukraine, are causing massive internal migration. So we've seen it in a very condensed scale in Ukraine, but after Katrina, 250,000 people moved from Louisiana to Atlanta. And so the city of Atlanta immediately had to provide housing, schooling, clothing, food for all of those folks. So there are so many different ways that climate change intersects with things that we are already caring about. And I think for me, that is really an important piece, is that the religious community is involved in a lot of issues. We're responding to disaster, we're responding to war, we're responding to food crises. So we need to respond to the environmental crisis as well, because that's the driving force of many of these things. And if not even a driving force, a greatly exacerbating one. So I wanted to actually hear a sort of a personal story from everyone, just a moment of realization, either something that started you on this journey or something that sort of reinforced the need for urgency. So it doesn't necessarily have to be like the moment you knew this was a big problem. It could be something for more recent, saying like, wow, we have to do something yesterday.
So maybe I'll start this time.
All right.
I have two things. One goes back to my childhood, which was when the moment that Apollo 8 emerged from the other side of the moon on Christmas Eve, and the astronauts recited the first chapter of Genesis. I think even more than the moon landing, Apollo 11, I think that transformed our entire view of who we are. Seeing the Earth rise on the horizon, it just made us realize just how small we are and how interconnected we all are. I was just a kid at the time, but it had a profound effect on me. More recently, Superstorm Sandy was probably that moment. Down in Stamford, where I am, closer to New York, basically broke, and Stamford wasn't much better. Almost everyone was out without power except my synagogue. For some reason, miraculously, we had power, and so congregants came, not, no pun intended, flooding in to enjoy the food. We just sort of raided the refrigerator and served whatever we had, heated it up. They got to charge their phones, and we had this great sense of communal bonding, to the point where someone toward the end of it said, I wish we could do this again. We could do this all the time. And I said, well, unfortunately, I think we're going to have to, because it's now becoming the new normal. And that was a very serious moment, with a little bit of levity. But we took that moment, and Terry, you mentioned it before, the next summer and into the next fall, we installed 845 solar panels on our roof. And our system was designed to produce 236,000 kilowatt hours per year to satisfy 70% of the synagogue's energy needs. And that system is still going strong. Several years later, we flipped the switch on the eve of the new year, of Rosh Hashanah. And that day, on the holiday, and Senator Blumenthal is in our congregation, he was there and he spoke that day. We had the eternal light lit, being fueled by the sun, which is the one energy resource that we don't seem to have the wherewithal to ruin at this point. So it was a very profound moment for us, and I think that's what's inspired me, along with you, Terry, and so many other leaders, to be involved in this to such a degree.
Anyone else, a personal story, moment of
So
realization?
my interest, I think, started in the early 80s when I first heard Sister Miriam Trace McGillis speak. She was a student of Father Thomas Berry at the time. And he was a scholar who worked with, his specialty was world religions. And in his study, he realized that no religion had an adequate origin story, and that one origin story that could unite all faith dimensions would be evolution. And the fact, as many of us have mentioned here tonight, that everything is connected. You know, all creatures, we're dependent on the earth, on creatures, on the tiniest insects. It's all connected. And Father Berry's teaching is quite simple. He said, everything deserves to be, everything is different from every other thing, and everything is in communion, is connected. And the other big teaching was that he felt that we were at a turning point, that unless humans protected the earth was not going to be able to continue to regenerate its systems, that we as humans had done so much destruction. And some of you may be familiar with the movie that's on Netflix that's called Breaking Boundaries. It's quite graphic about the various boundaries in our biological systems that we've crossed or are near crossing. So we're at a very critical time. And so to have a conversation like this, to spur each other on, to continue to protect the earth, do whatever we can. Elijah, I am so impressed by you because you're so young and doing this. It just brings joy to my heart. But we all have something to do, you know, whatever age we are, whatever job we're at. And so let's get out there and keep talking to one another.
That's great. Yes, absolutely. We all have something to do.
So I mentioned mine earlier when I spoke, but mine sort of turning point was going to the Dominican Republic and just realizing that others were facing these active threats to the climate, even though I wasn't seeing them as much. And it kind of made me realize that I lived, you know, in my American bubble and, you know, was ignorant to the issue. A lot of times we don't act on something unless we experience it or we see it. So I think that seeing it was really my turning point and how I started going into this work.
Sounds like it was a very powerful moment.
I would say that when I first come to realize about climate justice and different things of that nature is when my health started declining, far as with sinuses and allergies and even asthma. Just a little history. I was born in rural South Carolina, Rock Hill, in a community where we planted our own gardens. And so majority of the things that we ate was fresh. And from there, I moved to Los Angeles, California. And it's a different world from Rock Hill, South Carolina. And so I was able to kind of, you know, experience what it is to live in a major city. But there, you know, my allergies and everything was clear. But as soon as I moved to New Haven, my doctor had to start back all of my medications. And so I said to myself that this is very serious. And if I'm dealing with this, how many other people are dealing with the same issues due to the environment and the air in which we breathe? And so it's kind of personal to me because I experience it every day, you know, having to take allergy medicine and, you know, putting inhalers in my nose and all of that just to be able to have some quality of life. And so that's why I take it very seriously.
Thank you.
I'll be very brief, but touch on three topics on this quickly. One is when I was very young, my father was a farmer, and flooding became a major issue. And when the floods happened, people who were in the village areas or the ones who did not have good enough homes, they would become refugees. They would actually have to find a place. And the changes in the water, the change in the climate had started in that process where the flooding was in such a manner where people would lose everything almost every year. And there was no place for them to go, no higher areas to be at. And you recognize at that point you could not put two and two together, but it was clear that every year things would be getting worse in parts of the world. And then I've obviously had experiences with refugees who have been war-related refugees, but climate refugees as well. Then I'll share a story as a lung doctor. There are patients that you're seeing. I have stories that I can speak for much longer, but the moment a child is born in parts of our state, their health and their future is sealed, statistically speaking, because the chances of them not being able to breathe, being on steroids to be able to be and not be in the classroom, have sickness, which would not allow them to be able to complete the education and learn the amount they would do, and not be able to focus because they have to be on steroids to breathe. There's so many stories where now, and then they don't get doctors to take care of them. So because their insurance, it doesn't pay enough, so they are going from one place to the other and trying to identify how they would be able to just breathe, a simple basic thing that we are all experiencing right now, but we take it for granted. So seeing that, and the third thing that inspires me is seeing the young children, because we are leaving the world much worse than we found it for our little children. And then every time you see them, you recognize that we could have been better, we could do better. And you sort of feel a sense of failure. Thank you.
Wow, Dr. Catherine Hayhoe, in a webinar we did last year, she's obviously a very renowned climate scientist, said that 60% of our carbon emissions could be reduced by energy efficiency alone in buildings. And that really reminded me of a woman that I spoke to in Waterbury who was living in housing in Waterbury that wasn't insulated properly. And the heating system was basically located upstairs. So all of the heat in the winter was rising up to the bedroom. The living room, however, because the place didn't have really good insulation, was freezing. So she was freezing in her living room, boiling in her bedroom to the point where she couldn't sleep at night. And think about how you feel when you're sleep deprived. How do you go to work? How do your kids go to school? And she was paying for electric heat. So she was paying $1,000 a month for this experience. And so for me, that has stuck with me, the idea of environmental justice and energy justice and energy equity and what that means. And when you combine it with the fact that utility costs are the leading reason that people lose housing, then you have this really spiraling snowball of cause and effects. So that was something for me that has always stayed with me. And I know we want to get to our Q&A with the audience, but my final question is, how do you find hope when you're discouraged? Because obviously we're talking about some seriously heavy topics, but how do you find hope? What makes you feel better, even if it's like just for a day? Like, how do you refresh?
If I can start, I would say that this is a glimpse of hope. Just being able to come to the table with like-minded people to discuss and reason about it and acknowledge, number one, that it do exist, because you still have those who are not on the right side of the fight and that dismiss that, climate change or climate justice, environmental racism, they just deny it, dismiss it, or ignore it. And so this is hope, that we was able to get representation from so many faith communities to put aside our differences and come together and talk about something that's affecting all of us.
Absolutely.
So I agree with what you just said. I would have used the word to be in community with other people, to be struggling together and talking together.
There is more unity around this issue than I've seen in any other ecumenical issue, any other interfaith issue. And coming from a group, the Jewish people have been dying every generation for the last couple of thousand years, everyone, including Jews themselves, has said we're never going to make it another generation for whatever reason, for assimilation, anti-Semitism, whatever, and somehow we're still here. So that, in a strange way, gives me some optimism. But I also do see how culture has changed just in my lifetime. You know, I can remember a time when people would throw their trash out the car window, and you know, some commercials, whatever, but it changed the whole notion of that being acceptable, and you know, people would smoke everywhere. So I think there is a possibility of making these changes, and I think they're already happening, certainly in the desire, and the economical factor of finding alternative energy sources is much higher than it was, you know, just a couple of years ago.
Absolutely.
I will share. There's a word called Iblis, and if we were to translate it in English, it would mean Satan, or anything that's anti-beloved, anti-God. And Iblis, origin of Iblis comes from hopelessness. So as soon as hopelessness tries to impact us, we are questioning the existence of the beloved. And as soon as that happens, you say, you know, I'm in the wrong place, and you go back to hope. So that's what keeps me going and refusing to give up.
Awesome.
I think I just echoing what everyone else is saying, I agree with everyone. And, you know, realizing that others, you know, are out there fighting for this issue and we are not alone. And, you know, discussions like these that bring people together from different religious backgrounds are so important, and we are like a united front. And, you know, I've already been able to find so many resources, you know, as a young person, you know, in society, like my climate group that I'm a part of, you know, we just went international a few weeks ago, and we have so many local chapters throughout the country. And I think it just gives me hope knowing that there are other people out there that are fighting for this. And yeah.
That's awesome. I will say, I always encourage people to plant something. You know, an oak tree supports 400 different species of caterpillars, which are food for baby birds. And one tree actually filters 100 gallons of water a day, which is 36 gallons of water a year. Participating in a community garden provides food for people that don't have access to food. So I always like to get out in the garden and grow something, no matter what it is. That is where I can find hope. There's nothing like seeing things coming up out of the ground. Actually, so before we start the Q&A, Michelle, could you put up the slide about the upcoming events? Only because some of the questions are saying, what else can we do? And I thought that would actually be kind of a good segue, because we have some upcoming events, and we also have a collective action. And our collective action, the state legislative session is going on right now. There are several good environmental bills, and we can send you more information about them after this webinar. But the one we wanted to highlight tonight is HB 5039, which is an act concerning medium and heavy duty vehicles. Those are trucks. And the goal is to bring them up to California emission standards. These trucks make up about 6% of Connecticut's vehicle fleet, but they produce over 50% of our air pollution. So bringing them up to standard, modern emission standards would do a lot to improving air pollution in our state, reducing air pollution in our state, improving air quality, especially in communities that are overburdened with air pollution already. These trucks bring, you know, trash and whatnot into urban communities to be burned and that sort of thing. So being able to bring them up to standard would really help with air pollution. So that's House Bill 5039. You will receive information about this in a follow-up email, along with some other really important bills that have gotten out of committee but need a good support to get across the finish line this session. So IREJN is doing a couple of events in the next few weeks. The first is next Monday on bringing electric school buses to your community. The Volkswagen settlement has provided money for communities to have electric school buses. So we want people to learn sort of the process, The money is there. It's just a matter of applying for it, knowing who to talk to, how to advocate. So we'll be doing that next Monday evening, 7 to 8. Again, you'll get these links as well in follow-up email. The next one is on energy efficiency. We're going to be looking at the weatherization programs in Connecticut for homeowners, as well as people who are income eligible, because there are rebates and incentives. They are different a little bit. It's a great program. It's expanded for income eligible. There are a lot of incentives to help. And we'll also be looking at renters and landlords and sort of how to work with that, because that can sometimes be a challenge for some of our lowest income folks. So that is the next Monday. And then on Monday, that's supposed to be Friday, April 29th, 11 a.m. in Hartford, we are going to be doing a divestment action. We're partnering with IREJN, which is a Jewish national organization, to ask Wells Fargo and Bank of America to divest from fossil fuels. And so that will be Monday, April 29th at 11. So if you are looking for ways to learn about getting involved, and especially working for eco-justice, we've got some stuff for you. So thank you so much, Michelle, for allowing me to share that right now. And let's get into some questions. Hang on, let me get up to my chat. Got all kinds of questions. So I'm going to start Merle. So Merle Paczynski says, each of you have powerful stories that have pushed you to prioritize climate work. How do you think we can engage more people and also get our political leaders to put structural eco-justice and climate mitigation measures into place, particularly with the political climate as it is? So how do we get our political leaders and more people in general?
So Terry, I think with what you just shared, the bills that are being considered, that we could become informed about what is current, what's going on, and maybe connect with our legislators and support what they're doing, or support a bill that we think is really important. I was at a webinar once where they talked about, there's leaders, and we think about the big leaders in Washington or nationally, international leaders. But we have a lot of local leaders, and where we can have a lot of influences with our local situations, and that helps the whole. And maybe we would feel more empowered if we could just be more aware of our local situation and know the people and talk to them.
I can add a little bit as well. So I wear another hat as a state senator, and I'm actually the co-sponsor of 5039 and also a sister bill, SB4 as well. I saw Representative Michelle, who came in for a second too. So he was very active in trying to take care of our environment and have appropriate legislation. I know sometimes the federal policy is a little bit more complex, but you look at Connecticut as your model, where a lot of policies at the federal level are coming from the state of Connecticut. We actually are ahead of the curve in many respects. So, and then we are much more easily accessible to all of you to be able to reach out and share your priorities, your concerns, and identify issues that you want to educate the legislators on. The good news is that we are much more accessible than maybe the federal policymakers would be, because for obviously the Connecticut ones are accessible to us, but all Connecticut local state legislators should be able to help out. We have a number of bills. We have a very robust agenda every year. And it's not easy because some of our policies would lead to job losses. And it's not a simple, straightforward process. And identifying a win-win strategy is what will be needed to start to move in that direction. We can speak on this a little bit more later if necessary.
Wonderful, great. Let me, so Alana Butler actually asked, what can synagogues, churches, and mosques do to be more energy efficient? And I know I can speak from experience, the Small Business Energy Advantage program is the weatherization program that is available for houses of worship, and they'll come in and do an energy audit, and then they will make recommendations for the different actions that you can take. And you don't have to do everything they recommend if it's not in your budget, but you can certainly do everything that they recommend, and it's affordable. My church did it, and we spent probably $13,000 on some different energy efficient measures that we paid out over a few years, and it really, really helped. It made a huge difference. So, is there anyone who would like to speak to that specifically? If your faith community has become more energy efficient, what you did and how you got people on board?
Well, aside from that, the audit and all that, we've done a lot of that over the last decade. But here's something a little counterintuitive. Go virtual more. I'm sure a lot of people are thrilled to do that. That being said, as we're coming back, slowly, and who knows where we're going to be heading over the next several weeks, but we are coming back to more in-person events and hybrid events. I think we've learned a lot of lessons from the last couple of years, relying on Zoom so much and other technologies. They do save a lot of costs in heating, and it's much more efficient. People aren't driving to come to us. In the end, we may find that this makes a lot of sense, at least as a compromise. And certainly there have been a lot of savings. Churches, synagogues, mosques, all have saved quite a bit of money over the last couple of years out of necessity because we couldn't come together as much. So we need to find new compromises and understand that one of the reasons for going virtual is that it saves our planet.
That's a great point, honestly. And I was saying before people logged on that even once IREJN does in-person events, I'm never going back to a non-virtual option. There'll always be virtual, always be live streaming for the folks that can't drive or don't want to drive, and to save the carbon footprint, because it has been great. I mean, IREJN has had all virtual board meetings for 2 years now, and I think we actually all really like it. So, let's see here. So Sister Ruth said, start with local institutions such as hospitals and require them to stop using plastic cups for waters and for pills. At St. Francis, for example, they incinerate on site, which is more pollution in the north end of Hartford. And that to me raises a point of plastic pollution and how that impacts brown and black communities more. And it's funny, Sharon Lewis, who's the executive director for the Connecticut Coalition for Environmental Justice, we were doing a forum back in the pre-pandemic days, and I said, what is an issue that is related to environmental racism that people wouldn't necessarily think? And she said, plastic pollution. She said, where it is created and where it is incinerated, that happens in black and brown communities, generally urban, poorer communities. So thank you, Sister Ruth. So Reverend Nancy Leckerling, who is a co-chair of the IREJN board, has encouraged everyone to join IREJN, especially houses of worship, so that we can advocate together as a block, which I completely agree. And she also put several important environment-related bills to support in the Connecticut legislature in the chat. So if you can open up your chat, you can see there are several bills there. Does anyone have any other? Let me see if there are any other questions There's also an Earth Day climate strike organized by the Sunrise Movement. That they'll be gathering at, I think, the Capitol at 2 p.m. with a rally at 3 p.m. on Friday, April 22nd. It's Earth Day. I am the MC. It'll be super fun. I know they've got great lineups, so if you can attend that, please do. And let's see here. Is there another? Sister Rose asked if we had links, books that we've shared with us already. She was wondering, I think actually, I would love it if especially our speakers that have written books, maybe if we could get information on how folks could order them or get a copy or something like that. That would be great. I think there'd be a lot of interest. So let me see here. Someone was, so Sister Rose asked, do we have other states' legislative actions? I don't know. Oh, Michelle is going to put together a reading list and send it with a recording. So that'll be great. And that'll go out with, the reading list will also go out with our upcoming events and our legislative bills that we're looking at that we ask you to support. So I was talking to an activist who said that the legislators are saying they're not hearing very much from the environmental community, so we kind of need to step it up. Are there any other questions? Michelle, did you want to say anything?
I would like to say a few words, and I'm just going to share my screen real quick again. Because I want to say, give a special shout out to Elaine Campbell of the Archdiocese of Hartford. She couldn't be here tonight, but this was actually kind of her brainchild. She approached me with this idea some months ago, said she'd been talking to Alana Butler, who she's also been having a conversation with. I want to give a shout out to. So this has really been an amazing, just the planning process was fun and exciting. These panelists and everything that you've shared this evening has been extremely moving for me and inspiring. And it, you know, being a part of this organization, this is such a big part of what we do. And I'm just hoping that we can continue to do more work together, because this is really special, really, really magical. One of my responsibilities in this organization is to help support our membership and our fundraising efforts. So I am going to do a little, not even shameless. We're participating in our first Great Give, which is a 2-day or a day and a half fundraising effort with the Community Foundation of Greater New Haven. And it's May 4th and 5th. I'll be turning 50 on May 4th. So those of you out here want to give $50, celebrate every year of my life on this earth, that'd be great. But please think about contributing. You're going to see emails from us going forward. You can give anytime. You don't have to wait till May 4th, but we hope you'll participate. You can also consider becoming a member of our organization, whether you're an organizational member or an individual. And the IREJN has been an affiliate member of ours, as well as the Archdiocese of Hartford, for many, many years. It's a partnership that we value very highly. So thank you for letting me take a few moments. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Elijah, who is going to close us out with a special prayer.
Thank you. So thank you all so much for joining us this evening. We hope you're able to take something meaningful away from this very important discussion. And I would like to end with a prayer for peace, just like we started. May it be your will, Holy One, our God, our ancestors' God, that you erase war and bloodshed from the world, and in its place draw down a great and glorious peace, so that nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. Rather, may all the inhabitants of the earth recognize and deeply know this great truth, that we have not come into this world for strife and division, nor for hatred and rage, nor provocation and bloodshed. We have come here only to encounter you, eternally blessed one. So thank you so much to everyone, and have a great rest of your night.
Amen. Thank you so much, Elijah. Elijah, would you mind sending us that prayer so we can include it in the follow-up materials?
Yes, I will. Yes.
Oh, that's great. So I want to thank everyone, all of our speakers. It was so wonderful to have you. Thank you so much to the Connecticut Roundtable for sponsoring this and putting it together.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all so much.
Very impressive program. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks very much. Happy holidays.
Thank you.
Happy celebrations.
Thank you.
Have a good